everybody. Today's special guest is Doug Flynn. He played Major League Baseball for 13 years, also a former Indianapolis Indian. We'll be back to talk with Doug after these words. Great to have the opportunity to speak with former major leaguer, former Cincinnati Red, New York Met, and former Indianapolis Indian, Doug Flynn. Doug, how are you doing these days?
I'm good, Hallie. I was counting up the years, how far we go back. That's a bunch.
It's 1974, and your story is really a great one because I remember you telling me you went to UK, you're from Lexington, went to UK on a basketball scholarship, left school, and then attended a Cincinnati Reds tryout camp. Please tell us about that.
Well, you know, I came out of high school with no scholarship offers. I played 3 sports, but obviously wasn't very good at any of them. And so I came out of high school. I did get a phone call to come play. Joe Hall was coaching Kentucky basketball. They had signed 4 players at Kentucky for their freshman team. They signed a 5th who ended up signing with the Cleveland Indians. So they had a spot. So like a week or 2 before school starts, they called and said, would you come be the point guard on the basketball team? Sure. So I went over and played every game, started every game on the freshman team. We were ranked like 4th or 5th in the country. We had a nice team. We had 6'11", 6'8", 6'7", 6'4", and me. And it was fun. But went on and played baseball too, but only got 9 at bats. And basically they said, we just don't think you're good enough to play Division I baseball. So went to a junior college. Some buddies woke me up one morning and said, we're going to go try out for the Reds. And I went, sure, let's go. So one guy had a glove and 1 pair of shoes. And they said, Doug, you go first. And thank goodness the shoes fit. And I tried out the first time, went back a second time, a third time, a 4th time. And the Reds says, what would it take for you to be a pro ball player? And I said, Coke and a hot dog. And so I signed for $2,500. And then 3 years later was in the big leagues.
Yeah, it's a great story because you rose from A ball to AA to AAA each year.
Yeah, you know, and I was a little bit older though, Howie. I'd been 2 years of college. So when I went to rookie ball my first year, I was 24 or 20, yeah. Well, no, when I first went there, I was 20 years old. And all of a sudden you look around and I'm with some 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who were signing out of high school or out of Latin countries. And so I was in A ball. I got moved up to A ball. And the only reason I got moved up is because somebody got hurt. Greg Sinatro, who ended up being my roommate, got hurt in A ball. And I was playing shortstop, and Dave Pavlicek was my manager. And he said, Doug, can you play third? I went, yeah, that's where I played in high school. So I get up to play third the first game, and Russ Nixon's my manager. And after the first inning, he calls me. He's meeting me at the top of the step. He said, you never played third before, have you? I said, no, sir, not a day in my life. He said, well, why did you tell him you were a third baseman? I said, because it was an opportunity to move up a level. And if you'd have said, do you catch? I'd said, yeah, I caught in high school because I wanted to move up a level.
Yeah. And then you got to AAA Indianapolis Indians, 1974, had a fine season, got to the big leagues the next year. Before we go to Cincinnati, that Indianapolis Indians team, and that was my first year, 1974, was loaded with talent, more prospects than any other team. And I've been there over 40 years now. And you got, what, about 13 years in the big leagues? Ray Knight, who played third base next to you more than 10 years. Junior Kennedy and Dave Revering, the right side of the infield, 5 years. Joe Youngblood, it goes on and on. Yeah. All the time, what you guys achieved.
Yeah, you know, it was a fun bunch of guys because most of us had played together multiple years because there wasn't any place to go in Cincinnati. When you look at the lineup they had, we were pretty much stuck at our positions, and we were stuck in the minor leagues. Ed Armbrister, Joel Youngblood, Tommy Spencer, guys that were really good outfielders. Kent Burdick, really good outfielder. They're just, you know, where are we going to go play? You look around, you're not going to replace Morgan and Concepcion. You're not going to replace Bench. You're not going to replace Perez. You're not going to replace Griffey, and at that time, Pete Rose in the outfield. Or Griffey was actually with us for a little bit in '74, if you remember. He and Dreesen came down. So there was just there wasn't a lot of places to go. So we all had played together. We'd formed a really good bond. We all got along well, really liked each other. To this day, we're all still really good friends.
That's wonderful. And you guys obviously had talent, but you also knew how to play the game properly. You didn't see base running mistakes. You didn't see cutoff men missed. You guys were fundamentally sound.
They started that day one of spring training. You had instructors like Ron Plaza and Russ Nixon, and they would be out there and they would. I remember the first cutoff that I ever did as a pro player, and I did it the way I'd always done it. And Ron Plaza called me over and he said, "Is there any reason why you do your cutoffs like that?" I said, "That's the way I've always done them." He said, "Well, you've always done them wrong." And so he straightened me out right then. Here's where you go. And I mean, every day, and you well know this too, we worked on fundamentals all the time. And if we weren't getting it right during the season, we'd go out early in the afternoon. We work on rundowns. And so it was just the way we learned to play the game. Plus, you realize there's a lot more ways to win games if you play it fundamentally correct.
I think that's beautifully said. I'm glad you mentioned Ron Plaza. And he was the field coordinator through 1977. Then they made him a coach with the Reds. When he was the field coordinator, the man knew so much baseball, I thought he was one of the most valuable people and important people in the entire organization.
I agree 100% with you. I mean, he not only knew the game, but he took time with each player. And we used to go to instructional league back in those days. I don't know if they still do that or not. But while we were there, he would sit on the bench. And as the game was going on, he would look over at somebody and he'd say, "What's the count?" And then he'd say, "All right, what pitch did he throw? What was the last pitch he threw?" And he wanted to make sure you were watching because you were going to learn. And most of us were pretty young, so we were scared half to death of him. I remember one day he says, "Doug, you want to work on some backhands?" I went, "Yeah," because I played short most of my time in the minor leagues. So we went out and we worked, and I mean, I couldn't hardly throw it across the diamond afterwards. And he said, "How you feel?" I said, "I'm a little tired." He said, "Well, we better get you in shape." So we stayed an extra 10 minutes. About a month later, no, 2 weeks later, we're at spring training. "Doug, how you doing on your backhands?" Let's go do something. So I went out. I was still tired. He said, "How you doing?" I said, "Feeling good." "Well, good. Let's get about 15 more minutes worth." So you couldn't win with him, but he was making you better every time that he would instruct you. And we had such respect for him because we had heard that he worked for the CIA or something. We were scared to death of him.
And yes, the respect the young players coming through just swore by him. He was truly a great man. And he learned under another great man, George Kissel with the Cardinals, who was phenomenal.
Exactly. And you know, the Reds followed up with him. We had Jimmy Hoff was there for a long time. That was so good. I think in those days, the fundamentals were, the game's so different now, but fundamentals were really stressed on, especially moving runners, hitting behind runners. You know, it's a whole different ball game now. It's a whole different set of athletes that are playing the game now. And sometimes it gets hard to watch. And sometimes it's because you say, wow, you know, I don't think there's a lot of guys like me that would fit into the mold or even get drafted like they are today or signed, because most everybody weighs 200 pounds. Everybody lifts weights. Everybody's a lot stronger. You look at us. I mean, we were all 170 pounds, 165, 170 pounds. And that's outfielders, infielders, and everybody. Except for Revering. We thought Revering was a monster. He was 6'4" and about 230.
Yeah, and he got about 5 years. And you said you stay in touch with a number of those guys. And Joe Youngblood was one of them. He played more than 10 years in the big leagues, too.
Yeah, he and I, we were running mates. We played together in Cincinnati, New York, and Montreal. We were together, seemed like our whole career. And so we just remained friends. Our wives are friends. And we're all going to hook up at the New York Met Fantasy Camp. And that's a lot of fun to get down and see guys from all different eras. I remember going down as one of the younger players at camp. Now I'll be going down as, I don't think I'm the oldest. If Swoboda comes, I won't be the oldest, but I'll be right up there.
We'll be back to talk about Doug Flynn's major league career in just a moment. Doug Flynn is our guest. Doug, you got to the big leagues in 1975 with the Reds. played on 2 world championship ball clubs, and they go down as among the greatest teams of all time.
Mm. You know, it's hard to imagine. I went to spring training in 1975 just as an extra player, really with no chance to make the ball club, according to a lot of folks. And that really wasn't on my mind. I just was glad to go to spring training because, you know, defense had always been pretty good to me. My hitting wasn't very good. So I thought, well, you know, I'll go and I'll enjoy it and I'll get some more experience. And then who knows? Because when you get to AAA, you're close to the big leagues. Well, as it turned out, I went 32 for 90 in spring training. And I think I started hitting good and I just kept hitting for the whole spring. And if you're going to have a good spring, that was the time to have it. I only had really 2 good springs in, you know, all my years. And that happened to be one of them. And so they kept me. There was a time during the year where they were going to send me down, and Pete Rose told me that. And he said, before the game, you're going to have a good game or they're going to send you out because you're not playing very much here. So Sparky wants you to go get some more playing time. So I went out and I got 2 hits that game too. So I think God had his hand on me right from the beginning to keep me in the big leagues.
And those teams, Pete Rose, Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, I mean, they were simply outstanding, and you won back-to-back World Series.
You know, 75, there was so much pressure on them, Howie, because they were becoming the best team to never win it. They got beaten 70 by Baltimore, 72 by Oakland, 73 by the Mets. 74 sort of disappeared, and now they were being labeled as they were the Phil Mickelson that hadn't won the Masters before. They were the Reds, best team, but never won it all. So there was a lot of pressure. And then I guess ironically, it goes down to the 7th game of the World Series. And I remember after we got beat on 5th home run, standing next to Pete Rose, and an interviewer said, Pete, you got to be devastated. You had the game won, man. And then Carbo hits the home run, then Fisk hits the home run. Pete says, devastated? What are you talking about? He said, we'll be playing in the 7th game of the World Series. Every kid that ever grew up has visualized playing in the 7th game. And tomorrow we got our best pitcher on the mound. The world will be watching. I can't wait. Now, that's Pete's thinking. I'm a rookie. My thinking is, oh, man, I got a chance to get a ring. I'm going to make another $14,000 to go on with that $16,000 that I'm making. I'll be making as much money as my dad. We got to win this thing.
Yeah, because that 6th game was one of the great games of all time. And I remember Sparky being upset too, and Pete saying, we'll win tomorrow, don't worry about it. And,
that was Pete.
And that shows you what attitude means and how important attitude is, what Pete said.
Yeah, and that was Pete. If you played with him, he made you feel like you could conquer the world. There was no pitcher too good. There was no hitter that was that great. We're going to win, and that's the attitude he took every day. I mean, I remember during the course of his son's career, he called him up one day and he says, hey, Dad, I'm in an 0 for 21 slump. He said, can you help me get out of this? And Pete said, how do I know how to get out of one? I've never been in one. Call Davey. Davey will help you. So that was Pete. And he was so secure in his game that I don't care what you were going through. He had time to help the younger player, take him under his wing and help you to become a winning ball player.
And then you win the world championship, win that 7th game the next year in the postseason. And this remains the only team that's gone through the postseason undefeated since divisional play. You swept the Phillies, and then you swept the New York Yankees.
Well, all the pressure was off. They won one. Now let's just go play. And we did. And everybody played well that year. I mean, the whole 25-man roster just seemed to go out and just relax and play. And I think everybody on the other team knew that we were going to win. And then, of course, after we win that year, they started dismantling the team a little bit. They got rid of Tony. Tony was the heart and soul. He was, I kind of liken him to Dean Martin of the Rat Pack. They said Frank Sinatra could pretty much, do what he wanted with everybody there. But with Dean Martin, he was a little careful because he respected him so much. And that's the way Tony could get those guys hollering and screaming and getting on each other. And he'd sit back and relax. But nobody messed with Tony because he was just, he was just that good of a person.
And Sparky Anderson realized it early in spring training in 1977 when he said, this clubhouse isn't the same without Tony.
He's right. It wasn't. And there was a lot of guys that got traded that year, but Tony was, he was the heart and soul. And chemistry is, I don't know if it's underrated or overrated, but it is a part of the game. And you better have a nice clubhouse where guys get along, and you're playing for each other and you're not playing for yourself. And if you don't have that, it makes it for a rough season, and you get rid of kind of the heart and soul of that ball club. And it obviously couldn't be the same, even though they brought over a great pitcher like Tom Seaver. And I think they thought that Tom was, well, we all thought when Tom come into the Reds, man, this is going to take Tony's place for not being here. It didn't turn out that way, but it was certainly it was good for a lot of us that were involved in the trade.
Let's go back to June 15th. Back then, the trading deadline was June 15th. Mm-hmm. And tell us the story behind you being involved, you being traded in the Tom Seaver deal, because I love that story.
Well, we're playing, I believe, the Phillies. I'm sitting on the bench, like where I spent a lot of time in those couple of years. And Pete Rose playing third in Riverfront Stadium. It's real close to the visitors' dugout. And you can see Pete being very animated throughout the game. And he's talking, and the inning's over with, and Pete comes straight into me, sits down beside me, and he pats me on the leg. And I said, "I'm gone, aren't I?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Where am I going?" He said, "You're going to New York." And I'm thinking, okay, where? Which team am I going to? He said, "You're going to the Mets." And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, all right, I've had to back up Concepcion and Joe Morgan. Now you got Buddy Harrelson, Felix Millan, two really good players. So I said, well, who am I going for? He said, Tom Seaver. And I sarcastically said, straight up? And Pete went, no. And so he told me, he says, it's you and Zach and a couple of minor leaguers. And what I found out later, that they already had the deal done with Zach and Stevie Henderson and Danny. And they were talking one day, and Johnny Bench said, throw Doug in there. And I asked him later, I said, well, why would you tell that? He says, because you weren't going to play here. He said, I thought if you moved, it was going to give you an opportunity to play every day. And as it turned out, I got to play some, and I still stay in touch with so many folks in New York that have been so good to me over the years. And of course, through fantasy camp, I've got to have some great relationships. And not only that, but you have some first responders in New York, Howie, that are at a fire station that I met 20 years ago, right after 9/11. Every time I'm in New York, I go to the firehouse and have lunch with them. I had a golf tournament that Johnny Bench and I do. I invited them to come down to our tournament. And Danny Keene and Steve Rogers are just two wonderful folks. And they called me up actually a couple of years ago and said, you want to come up to New Year's Eve at New York? And I said, no. They said, no, we're serious. And I went, I am too. No. They said, why not? I went, because I don't want to stand out there 14 hours and wet my pants and all that stuff. He said, no, you come up, you meet us, you go out and have dinner, meet us at the fire station at 11. We'll walk you right underneath the ball. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of.
That's great. You won a Gold Glove with the Mets in 1980. Tell us about the experience, and how did you feel about being traded? Because you were going to get to play more. What was the whole feeling and the experience?
Well, I really had mixed emotions, Howie, because you're leaving back-to-back world championship teams. Not only that, but I'd played 3 years in the minor leagues. Now I'm leaving all my friends and my buddies, and I'm having to go someplace else. And New York is a little different than Cincinnati. I don't know if you know that, but it's a little bit different. And I'm a country boy. Matter of fact, the first day I walked on the field in my uniform, I hear Mr. Flynn. I went, oh, that's nice. I turned around to some young kid and I said, hey, how you doing? He said, you suck. And I went, well, nice meeting you too. So I mean, it ain't going to be easy. And I got a lot of letters for hate mail. And I said, look, I'd be ticked off too if Tom Seaver got traded. But what a lot of people don't realize, Tom was going to go somewhere. He was out of town. He was leaving because of all the stuff that was going on. None of us knew at the time all of the political stuff that was going on between Tom and the press and that. We later found out, and we're very grateful that he did choose Cincinnati, because Stevie Henderson played a lot of years in the big leagues. I got a lot of years in the big leagues. Zach got a lot of years in the big leagues. Danny Norman's the only one who didn't play for a lot of years, and a nice guy. So, yeah, I had mixed emotions, but once I got there and got around Joe Torre, and people like Kuzma and Jerry Grody and John Matlack and Buddy and Felix, who just, they knew the deal wasn't my fault. I didn't make the trade. And so they treated me extremely good. And that's why people said, how was it in New York? And I said, well, if you're going to be a professional athlete, that's the place to play, because you're going to get plenty of publicity. And Jay Horowitz helped me with the Gold Glove. I was a runner-up. I didn't know this, but Jack Lang told me. He said I was a runner-up in 78, finished second in 79 in a Gold Glove. I win in 80, and I'm a runner-up again in either 81 or 82. So, I'm in New York, and I still get hammered pretty good in New York, but I'm there 4 years, and I almost have 4 Gold Gloves. I'd like to have done better, but that's all I had in the tank.
Well, Doug, you achieved so much. You've also achieved a great deal in your post-playing days. I want to thank you so much for taking time out to speak to us, and we wish you continued success in all your endeavors.
Howie, you're a dear friend, and when you call, I'll be there for you, my buddy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You're a great friend, too, and I always remember how nice you were and the way you treated me when I was a rookie breaking into professional ball.
Well, and back at you. Same with you, buddy.
It's Doug Flynn. We'll have more after these words. Thanks to our guest, Doug Flynn. We'll be back with our final show next week. See you then. Goodbye, everybody.